There's a man in Atlanta who makes $412,000 a year, drives a car that costs more than most people's houses, and cannot cover a $1,200 emergency without putting it on a credit card. This is not a hypothetical. This is a pattern that shows up so often among high earners in America that financial planners have a name for it. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why it happens, why it is happening to people who look successful from the outside, and more importantly, how to make sure it never happens to you. Stick around, because the third example in this video involves a medical doctor who was earning multiple six figures and was, by every meaningful financial definition, poor. Before we get into that, if you are someone who wants to actually understand money instead of just working for it, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. Because this channel breaks down exactly how wealth really works in America, not how it appears to work. Let's start with a question that sounds simple, but almost nobody can answer correctly. If you had to guess, would you say a household earning $250,000 a year is wealthy? Most people would say yes without hesitation. But wealth and income are not the same thing, and confusing the two is the single most expensive mistake in American personal finance. Income is what flows into your life. Wealth is what stays. And there is an entire category of Americans who have mastered the first one while completely failing at the second. Financial researchers have a name for this group. They call them Henrys, which stands for high earners not rich yet. The term was coined by financial writers covering upper middle class professionals, and it describes something very specific. These are lawyers, doctors, engineers, tech workers, and business owners who bring home substantial paychecks every 2 weeks. Yet somehow finish every single year with almost nothing to show for it. Not because they are irresponsible people, not because they lack intelligence, but because of a set of psychological and structural forces that quietly convert high income into an illusion of wealth while leaving almost nothing behind. Here is where it gets interesting, because the trap does not spring shut all at once. It happens in stages, and each stage feels completely rational in the moment. Understanding these stages is going to change the way you look at every raise, every bonus, and every big purchase for the rest of your life. The first stage begins the moment someone crosses into a higher income bracket. Picture a young engineer who spent years living on ramen noodles in a shared apartment while earning $55,000 a year. She gets promoted, and suddenly she's earning $110,000. Her income just doubled overnight. Stress. What happens next is almost universal, and it has a name in behavioral economics: lifestyle inflation. The apartment gets bigger, the car gets newer, the vacations get more frequent. None of these decisions feel excessive in isolation. Each one feels like a reasonable reward for years of hard work. But here's the part almost nobody talks about. Her spending did not just increase, it increased proportionally to her income, which means her savings rate, the actual percentage of income she keeps, barely moved at all. This is where we need to pause and understand a concept that explains almost everything you're about to hear. It is called hedonic adaptation, and it is one of the most well-documented findings in psychology. Human beings adapt extremely quickly to improvements in their circumstances. Once they adapt, the new circumstance simply becomes the baseline. The first time you fly first class, it feels incredible. By the fifth time, it feels normal, and flying economy suddenly feels like punishment. The same exact mechanism applies to income. A salary that once felt like more money than you knew what to do with eventually feels barely adequate. Not because your needs changed, but because your reference point changed. Now here is where the story takes a turn that surprises even people who consider themselves financially literate. Lifestyle inflation alone would be a problem, but it is not the whole trap. The second stage is what turns lifestyle inflation from a bad habit into a genuine financial trap, and it involves something most high earners never see coming: the tax system itself. Picture two neighbors. One earns $60,000 a year. The other earns $300,000 a year. It would be reasonable to assume the second neighbor takes home 5 times as much money, but the United States uses a progressive tax system, meaning higher portions of income get taxed at higher rates. And once you stack federal income tax, state income tax in many states, Social Security and Medicare taxes, in some cases the additional Medicare tax that kicks in at higher income levels, a person earning $300,000 might only take home roughly 60 to 65% of that figure after all taxes are accounted for, depending on their state and filing situation. That means the effective spending power gap between the two neighbors is nowhere near as large as the headline salary numbers suggest. High earners frequently make lifestyle decisions based on their gross income, the number on the offer letter, rather than their net income, the number that actually lands in the bank account. And that single miscalculation quietly sets the entire trap in motion. But we are still not at the most dangerous part, because taxes reduce the pie. But the next stage is what convinces high earners to give away the pie that remains, and it comes disguised as a status symbol. This is where we need to talk about the house. In America, home ownership carries enormous cultural weight. It is often treated as the definitive proof that someone has made it. And here is where the trap becomes almost invisible, because buying a home is not, by itself, a financial mistake. The mistake is a specific pattern that financial planners see constantly among high earners, and it is called being house poor. This happens when someone qualifies for a mortgage based on their income. Banks are often willing to approve mortgages that consume 30, 35, even 40% of monthly gross income, and they take the maximum amount they qualify for rather than the amount that leaves breathing room in their budget. The monthly payment fits on paper. It even fits in the bank's own underwriting formulas. But once you add property taxes, homeowners insurance, maintenance, HOA fees where applicable, and the inevitable surprise expenses that come with owning property, that same household can find 60, 70, sometimes 80% of their take-home pay disappearing into a single asset before groceries, transportation, or savings are even considered. Here's the detail that makes this so dangerous. The house feels like an asset, and legally it is one. But an asset that consumes nearly all of your monthly cash flow does not function like wealth in any practical sense. It functions like a very expensive obligation that happens to appreciate slowly over time. You cannot use your home equity to pay for groceries next Tuesday. You cannot liquidate a bedroom to cover a car repair. On paper, the household looks like it owns hundreds of thousands of dollars in real estate. In reality, it has almost no liquid cushion, and one missed paycheck away from serious financial stress. This pattern is not new, and it is not unique to any single income level. Go back to the years leading up to 2008, and you will find households across a wide range of incomes, including high earners, who had stretched themselves into homes using financing structures that assumed housing prices would keep climbing indefinitely and income would keep rising to match. When that assumption broke, it did not just hurt low-income borrowers. It devastated plenty of six-figure households who had built their entire financial identity around an asset that suddenly could not be sold for what they owed on it. The lesson from that period was not that homeownership is dangerous. The lesson was that treating your maximum approved loan amount as your target purchase price is one of the most common and costly financial miscalculations a high earner can make. But here is what almost nobody talks about when they tell this story. The house is only half of the vehicle for this trap. The other half sits in the driveway, and it might be even more damaging over time because, unlike a home, a car is a depreciating asset from the moment it is purchased. Consider a household earning $200,000 a year that leases two vehicles, one for each spouse, at a combined cost of $1,800 a month. That single line item alone can consume more of their take-home pay over a decade than most people realize, especially once you account for insurance on higher value vehicles, which tends to scale upward alongside the price of the car. And because leases are typically renewed every 2 to 3 years, this expense never shrinks, never gets paid off, and never converts into an asset the household actually owns. It simply repeats, year after year, quietly extracting income that could otherwise have gone toward building real wealth. Financial planners sometimes describe this as the difference between a working asset and a status expense, and vehicles, for the vast majority of American households, fall firmly into the second category, no matter how much they might feel like a reward for career success. There's one more expense category that deserves its own moment because it rarely gets discussed in the same breath as houses and cars, and yet it can quietly outweigh both of them combined. For high-earning parents, especially in expensive metropolitan areas, the cost of childcare and private schooling can reach staggering levels well before a single dollar goes toward retirement or investing. Full-time childcare in major American cities frequently runs into the tens of thousands of dollars annually per child, and private school tuition can add tens of thousands more once children reach school age. A dual-income household earning what looks like an extraordinary combined salary can find that after childcare, schooling, and the associated costs of maintaining the neighborhood and lifestyle that come with those choices, there is remarkably little left over each month. What makes this particular expense so dangerous is that it feels non-negotiable in a way that a car lease does not. Parents rarely view spending on their children's development as lifestyle inflation, even when, from a purely financial standpoint, it produces the exact same effect. High income flowing out almost as quickly as it flows in, leaving little room for the kind of saving and investing that actually builds lasting wealth. Now let's bring in the third stage, and this is the one that almost never gets discussed openly, because it involves something deeply human, the desire to not look poor in front of people who know how much you earn. Picture a surgeon. She spent over a decade in training, accumulated substantial student loan debt along the way, and finally starts earning an income that most Americans would consider life-changing. But she is now surrounded by colleagues, other surgeons, specialists, hospital administrators, who all live a certain way. There is an unspoken social expectation that comes with certain professions and certain income brackets. The car you drive, the neighborhood you live in, the school your kids attend, the vacations you post, All of it becomes a kind of silent scoreboard among peers. Behavioral economists call this the tendency to compare ourselves not to the general population, but to the specific reference group we find ourselves in. A janitor earning $45,000 a year does not feel poor compared to the national average, but a surgeon earning $350,000 a year, surrounded by other surgeons earning $500,000, can feel genuinely behind, even though her income places her in roughly the top 2% of American earners. This comparison trap does something insidious. It does not just encourage overspending. It reframes overspending as necessary, even responsible, because everyone around you is doing the same thing, and it appears to be working out fine for them too. Nobody at the dinner party is showing you their credit card statement. Nobody is mentioning that the leased luxury vehicle in the driveway gets swapped out every 3 years because they could never actually afford to own it outright. The entire reference group could be engaged in the identical trap simultaneously, each person assuming everyone else has it figured out, when in reality most of them are managing an almost identical version of financial fragility behind a shared facade of success. Here's where the story takes an unexpected turn, because you would think the solution is obvious: just save more money. But high earners face a specific obstacle that lower and middle income households do not face in the same way, and it involves the very same tax code we mentioned earlier. Many tax-advantaged retirement accounts in the United States, the tools specifically designed to help Americans build long-term wealth efficiently, come with income limits or contribution caps. As income rises, the percentage of that income that can be sheltered in favorable accounts actually shrinks in relative terms. A person earning $50,000 a year who maxes out a basic workplace retirement account is sheltering a substantial chunk of their total income. A person earning $500,000 a year hits the same contribution limits, but because that limit represents a tiny fraction of their total income, the majority of what they earn flows through as regular taxable income, with no automatic savings mechanism attached to it at all. Without deliberate, disciplined action, that excess income does not save itself. It simply becomes available for spending, and spending, as we now understand, expands to fill whatever space is available. This brings us to a pattern interrupt worth sitting with for a moment, because at first glance, this entire situation seems like it only applies to people earning hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. But the psychological mechanics apply at every single income level. Someone earning $70,000 who gets a raise to $90,000 experiences the exact same hedonic adaptation, the exact same reference group comparison, and the exact same temptation to stretch into a bigger mortgage. The high income poverty trap is not really about how much you earn. It is about the gap between income and awareness. The wider that gap grows, the more dangerous the trap becomes, regardless of the number on your paycheck. Now, let's return to that doctor we mentioned earlier, because her story illustrates just how far this can go before it becomes visible even to the person living it. She completed her residency in her early 30s, finally began earning an attending physician's income, and immediately felt the pull to make up for years of deferred rewards. She bought a home near the top of her approval range. She leased a vehicle appropriate to her new professional identity. She helped support aging parents, which is a generous and common obligation among many high-earning professionals. And she carried substantial student loan debt from her medical training that was still accruing interest in the background. On paper, her income looked enviable. In practice, once her mortgage, her loan payments, her lease, her taxes, and her family obligations were accounted for, she had almost nothing left at the end of each month. She described the sensation later as feeling like she was running on a treadmill that kept speeding up, and no matter how fast she moved, she never actually got anywhere. What eventually changed her situation was not a raise, and it was not a lucky investment. It was a shift in how she measured her own progress. Instead of tracking her income, which was already high and continuing to climb, she started tracking her net worth, the actual difference between what she owned and what she owed. And once she started measuring that number, something remarkable happened. Every financial decision she made started to look completely different because she was no longer asking whether she could afford the monthly payment. She was asking whether the decision moved her net worth up or down. This distinction between managing your income and managing your net worth is genuinely one of the most important ideas in this entire video. So let's slow down and make sure it is completely clear. Income is a flow. It comes in, and if you do not direct it somewhere intentional, it flows right back out just as fast, often faster once lifestyle inflation and social comparison get involved. Net worth is a stock. It is the actual accumulated result of everything you have earned, saved, invested, and paid down over time, minus everything you still owe. A person can have a dramatically increasing income and a completely flat or even declining net worth, and this is precisely the mechanism behind the high income poverty trap. The income statement looks fantastic. The balance sheet tells a very different story. Here is a comparison that tends to surprise people the first time they hear it. Multiple studies on lottery winners and professional athletes, two groups who experience sudden, dramatic income increases, have found strikingly high rates of financial distress within just a few years of receiving that windfall. Sports Illustrated conducted well-known reporting on this exact phenomenon among retired professional athletes, finding that a significant portion faced serious financial difficulty within years of retirement, despite career earnings that would be considered life-changing by almost any standard. The mechanism is not that these individuals are uniquely bad with money. The mechanism is that sudden large income without a corresponding shift in financial behavior and awareness reliably produces the exact same outcome. Money flows in, lifestyle expands to absorb it, and when the income eventually slows or stops, there's nothing left to show for the years when it was flowing freely. The high income poverty trap is simply a slower, quieter version of the exact same story, playing out over an entire career instead of a few dramatic years. So now the question becomes, what actually breaks this pattern? And this is where the video shifts from explaining the problem to showing you the way out. Because there is one, and it does not require earning less or living like a monk. The first shift is moving from tracking income to tracking savings rate, meaning the actual percentage of your take-home pay that gets directed into savings, investments, or debt pay down every single month. This single number matters more than your salary, more than your job title, and more than your net income after taxes. A person earning $90,000 a year who consistently saves 20% of their income will, over a working career, build more real wealth than a person earning $300,000 a year who saves 2%. And this is not a close comparison. Compounding rewards consistency in time far more generously than it rewards a higher starting number. The second shift involves what financial planners sometimes call paying yourself first. Instead of spending money throughout the month and saving whatever happens to be left over, which for most high earners turns out to be nothing, the healthier structure automatically directs a fixed percentage of every paycheck into savings and investment accounts the moment it arrives, before any spending decisions are made. This removes willpower from the equation entirely. You're no longer relying on discipline at the register. You are relying on a system that was already put in place before temptation had a chance to enter the picture. The third shift is recognizing that a raise is not automatically a lifestyle upgrade. This does not mean high earners should never enjoy their success. It means being deliberate about it. A common and effective approach among people who successfully escape this trap is directing a meaningful portion of every raise or bonus towards savings and investments first, and allowing only a portion of the increase to flow into lifestyle spending. This allows for genuine enjoyment of increased income while ensuring that the gap between earning and keeping does not widen every single time a promotion arrives. The fourth shift, and this one is subtle but incredibly powerful, is separating housing and vehicle decisions from what a lender or dealership says you qualify for. Banks and mortgage lenders calculate approval amounts based on their own risk tolerance and profit models, not based on what leaves you with a healthy, flexible personal budget. Just because you are approved for a certain mortgage amount does not mean that amount is wise for your specific financial goals. Many financial educators suggest evaluating housing costs based on a percentage of take-home pay that leaves substantial room for savings, insurance, unexpected repairs, and enjoyment of life, rather than stretching to the absolute maximum a bank is willing to lend. There's also a sixth shift worth mentioning, and it has nothing to do with spreadsheets or budgeting apps. It involves being honest with yourself about which expenses are genuinely improving your life and which ones exist purely to signal success to people whose opinions will not matter to you in 5 years. This is not an argument for austerity. Enjoying the fruits of a high income is a completely reasonable goal, and nobody should feel guilty for taking a nice vacation or driving a car they enjoy. The distinction that matters is intentionality, spending that is chosen deliberately, with full awareness of its costs and its trade-offs, tends to produce lasting satisfaction. Spending that happens automatically, driven by comparison or momentum, tends to produce the exact treadmill feeling that Doctor described earlier, where the number on the paycheck keeps climbing but the feeling of progress never seems to arrive. And the fifth shift, which brings us back to where we started this video, is redefining what wealth actually means in your own mind. Wealth is not the number on your pay stub, it is not the model of car in your driveway, it is not the size of the house your neighbors see when they drive by. Wealth is optionality. It is the ability to leave a job you dislike without panicking about next month's bills. It is the ability to handle a medical emergency, a period of unemployment, or a major repair without going into debt. It is the quiet confidence of knowing that your financial life does not depend entirely on your next paycheck arriving exactly on schedule. This is precisely why the high-income poverty trap is so dangerous. It does not feel like poverty from the inside. It feels like success because every external signal, the house, the car, the vacations, the job title, confirms that everything is going according to plan. The danger is entirely invisible until the paycheck stops, the job is lost, the market shifts, or an unexpected expense arrives. And suddenly the household discovers that despite years of an impressive income, there is almost nothing standing between them and genuine financial crisis. The good news, and this is worth sitting with as we bring this story home, is that the exact same forces that create this trap can be redirected to build extraordinary wealth instead. High income is not the enemy here. Unexamined income is the enemy. A high earner who tracks net worth instead of income, who saves before spending instead of after, who resists the pull of comparison, and who treats their home and their lifestyle as tools rather than trophies, is in one of the most powerful financial positions available to anyone in this country. The very same 6-figure or 7-figure income that traps so many people quietly can become an extraordinary wealth-building machine for the people who simply choose to see it clearly. So here's the question worth asking yourself honestly right now. Are you tracking your income, or are you tracking your net worth? Because one of those numbers can be impressive and completely meaningless at the same time, and the other one is the only number that actually determines whether you are becoming wealthy or simply appearing to. I would genuinely love to hear where you stand on this in the comments below, whether you've experienced this gap yourself or watched it happen to someone close to you, because these stories are often more common than people are willing to admit out loud. If this video gave you a new way of looking at your own finances, do the channel a favor and hit that like button, subscribe if you have not already, and turn on notifications so you do not miss what is coming next, because the next video takes this exact idea and applies it to one of the most misunderstood financial decisions in America, the one that convinces even careful savers to make a mistake that can take a decade to undo.